As President-elect Trump begins appointing his staff for 2025, RFK Jr. is poised to become the director of the Department of Health and Human Services, and COVID vaccine issues are front and center once again.
Kennedy was rewarded when Trump tapped him to be America's next Health and Human Services Secretary, a controversial pick given Kennedy's history as a vaccine skeptic.
Now, Trump has vowed to open up the books and reveal what really happened with misinformation, Big Pharma, Fauci, and the vaccine.
I'm going to let him go wild on health. I'm going to let him go wild on the food. I'm going to let him go wild on medicines.
Today, we get a special look into this world from Brienne Dressen, a healthy school teacher and mother of two who volunteered to be part of COVID-19 vaccine trials, but had an experience so traumatic, she is now filing a lawsuit that could change the world of vaccines forever.
This is going to be something that I think probably every American is going to want to know.
All right, Brienne Dressen, I'm going to start with a little bit of background. So you're a Utah mother of two, former preschool teacher. You were an AstraZeneca vaccine trial participant, left chronically injured. You were part of the first COVID vaccine-related lawsuit in the U.S., and you're suing AstraZeneca, claiming that you've been left permanently disabled. You're also the co-founder of React19.org and the author of Worth a Shot.
Yeah, co-author.
Got it. Brienne, thank you for being here today.
Well, thanks for having me.
So, there's a lot to unpack. A lot. So, to go back, COVID is happening. There's a lot of question marks. In fact, I did a show about COVID called Shelter in Place because there was so much disinformation, misinformation, confusion, propaganda around it that we tried to sort of cut through it. And a lot of the people that we interviewed have since backtracked or are saying different things or aren't saying anything at all. And as it turns out, a lot of what was told in the beginning has turned out to be either not be true or manipulated in certain ways.
Right.
So we wanted, because you're on the front lines, we wanted to talk to you about all of it. So let's just get into it. Why were you part of this test group?
It really, now looking back, I get that question a lot. But
Yeah.
for me, it wasn't even a question of if I was going to get the COVID vaccine, it was when.
Mm-hmm.
And at the very beginning of the pandemic, I have a lot of healthcare professionals in my family.
Mm-hmm.
They all really, expressed to me how concerning the initial variant of COVID was. And they were seeing different things in the hospitals.
Like
and
people were dying.
Yeah, people were dying, and not just from vents, right? Like we're talking about clotting disorders
Sure.
and heart attacks in really young people, right, that had been infected previously in the few months before that.
People were worried it was like a contagion type event.
Yeah,
Contagion
yeah.
the movie, meaning like, oh, this could be, the end of humanity unless we get in there.
Yeah, yeah. And then, of course, you turn on the TV and it was, possible Armageddon coming,
Yeah.
right? Like it was, so there was the fear piled on top of my own personal experiences that I was, hearing from my family.
In the sort of healthcare field.
So
you were pro-vaccine. You're like, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I had all of my vaccines up to that point.
Mm-hmm.
My kids were fully vaccinated. My husband's a PhD chemist. And so, we had been following the science, which we can talk about that later. Yeah. But at the time, we had been faithfully invested in helping society, supporting those around us, and making sure that we all together get out of the pandemic with as little of damage as possible, right? So I had a couple of friends that enrolled in the Moderna clinical trial, and it went fine. And my phone number rang, and it was AstraZeneca's test clinic, and they said, hey, we're going to screen you for a clinical trial. I said, okay, let's see what this is about. Went through the thorough screening process, and I qualified because of my job as a preschool teacher, because this is, preschool teacher, very high risk at getting COVID. You're basically guaranteed.
You're going to get everything if you're a preschool teacher.
You get everything.
It's a petri dish.
Correct,
Yeah.
yes. And if you've ever seen a little child wear a mask, it's pointless. Like
there's snot everywhere. I'm familiar.
Yes, exactly. And so I just agreed, and it wasn't supposed to be a big deal, obviously, because I had had all of my other vaccines and it hadn't been a problem at all.
Right. So they call you up and you say, so it's a phase 3 clinical trial, I believe?
Phase 3, yes.
Phase 3.
Yes.
What happened after the injection?
Yeah, so I went in, signed the contract, and the contract, they assured me that they would provide medical support if there was a injury-related, research-related injury is the words that they used. And then also they would provide financial support if there was a problem. And so that right there, I felt reassured going into it that, okay, these are responsible people. I'm contributing in a way that's, productive. So let's go for it, right? And so I get my injection, and within an hour, I started with tingling down the same arm as my injection, kind of like when your limb falls asleep.
And sorry, you get the injection, then you go home, or you're still in the trial?
It was actually on the way home from the clinic that my arm started tingling abruptly. And there was no reason, there was no circulatory restriction whatsoever. I mean, it was just sitting up, get a shot, go and sit in the monitoring area for a while, and then go get my car. And then on the way home, it was problems.
Right.
And later that night, my vision had become blurred and double. So I was watching the TV. Instead of one TV, there were two. And then the sound started getting weird, and it sounded like there were 2 seashells over my ears. And that night, I had a typical vaccine response, the fever, all of the, and those had resolved by morning. But by the time I got up to get ready for work, my left leg was slumped, and I kept walking into the left doorways. And it was just strange. But, as a preschool teacher during COVID, these little tiny people, little kids, they had a really hard time during COVID. Everything was uncertain. They couldn't go play with their friends like they used to. They can't go visit grandma. And at that time, I really took it very seriously, my consistency and my ability to help provide them stability in this uncertain time. So I didn't care that my leg was slumped. I was going to work.
Wow. And sorry, did you call them and say, hey, by the way, I'm tingling and my leg doesn't work?
Yeah. So I called them that morning, left them a message, didn't get a call back. So I was like, okay, well, this is okay. Maybe this is normal, because if it was alarming, they would call me back right away.
Right.
So anyway, so I go to school, and the kids' little voices get louder and louder and louder as the day goes on. But it wasn't actually them. It was my sensitivity to sound was ramping up.
Did you know that?
Yeah, because the sensitivity to light hit as well. So between the two, it was very obvious there was something wrong. So I turned off all the lights in the classroom, had the kids parked in front of a learning channel, just waiting for their parents to come get them.
Yeah.
And then that was the last day that I taught. From there, the symptoms just piled on. I ended up with severe tachycardia, bradycardia, which is where your heart just takes off for no reason.
Like
heart rate.
Pulse,
Yeah. And blood pressure was spiking and diving, and I was passing out, and my legs were failing. They weren't working appropriately. I became incontinent. And this painful...
Severe.
Oh, yeah. So, and I had never experienced anything like any of this in my body in, the nearly 40 years I had been alive at that point, right? And the tingling went from one arm over to my other arm, head to toe, and it moves with my heart rate, went into my brain, so I couldn't even think. My eyes were vibrating, so I couldn't even see straight. So
what did you do?
Well, my husband obviously knew there was something terribly wrong. So we called the test clinic again, and it was either the second or the third time that we called them. They finally called back and they said, yeah, that's a problem. So why don't you come in? So my husband drove me up to the test clinic because I couldn't see very well. And they did an evaluation. They said, you really need to get evaluated by a neurologist to rule out several severe conditions. Because if it's not a genetic issue, we need to report this back to AstraZeneca so they can put the clinical trial back on hold. And I said, wait, back on hold? And that's when they informed me that, yes, AstraZeneca had been put on hold previously due to severe neurological complications. And so we ended up in the ER 4 times over the next 2.5 weeks, ended up in the hospital after that.
And sorry, when you go to the ER, did you have to tell them I was part of a trial of...
yes. Yeah. And this was actually another thing that I saw firsthand. I saw what was going on at that time with just the pandemic in general, because it was still the alpha variant that was raging. This was in November of 2020, right before Pfizer was approved and licensed. But the hospitals still had restricted the staff dramatically, right? So the people that were in the hospitals were overwhelmed because there was just too many sick people coming in. Yeah. They would always put me into the COVID wards. So I saw what all of these hospitals' COVID wards looked like.
Sorry, they put you in COVID wards because they were thinking that it was like a COVID reaction, or there was reaction?
Yeah, because it looked so similar. And so then they'd throw me in there and be like, well, the vaccine wouldn't do this, right? And so then they do all the PCR testing, antigen testing, right? They even gave me a lumbar puncture to check for COVID. Every single one of those tests came back negative. And once they came back negative, then they'd pull me out, put me into the normal side. But in the meantime...
So you didn't have COVID?
No, I've never...
So sorry,
to that point, I had never had COVID.
So you have reactions to the vaccine. They say, oh, it's probably COVID because it's COVID reaction sort of symptoms. You don't have COVID, and then they go, oh.
Correct, yeah. And then they're like, well, we need to talk to the test clinic. We need to talk to the drug company. What are they saying?
And you're freaking out at this point because this isn't...
Well, I'm so sick, I'm not even...
Really?
So my husband is the one doing that, right? Yeah. So he's the one that was like my primary advocate that just, he was like, yeah, let's get the drug company on the phone. They never picked up the phone. The test clinic called them repeatedly and they would never respond. So we were on our own.
Sorry, the test clinic was subcontracting?
Yes. Right. So, and the test clinic is always the intermediary with the drug company. What I didn't understand at the time, fast forward several years now.
Sure, yeah.
The drug company pays the test clinic to run these trials. So there is no objective middleman to separate that relationship with the people that are in control of running the trials. The drug company also is the people that design these tests.
Oh, I see.
So you can't expect that the people that serve to benefit from profiting from this product are going to design a study that is going to knock their product in any way, shape, or form. And so there's several issues within the trials, especially that I walked through, that make it very clear that they were not objectively collecting the full scope of side effects from their products.
And so to go back to you're deathly ill.
Yes.
Your husband is like, okay, what's happening here? Can somebody please tell us what's going on?
Right.
What happens then?
So the hospital systems were also wanting to know. And they said, okay, well, we need to know if you actually got the vaccine.
Yeah.
So we call the test clinic, say we need to...
Versus a placebo?
Versus a placebo, because the placebo was saline.
Right, yeah.
So that first night that I had that typical vaccine response, I knew that it wasn't saline, right? But nobody else did.
Sure.
The hospital wanted that documented. The test clinic called while I was in the hospital when my legs weren't working, and they informed me that, yes, you did in fact have the COVID vaccine. And because of your reaction, we are going to ask you to not get the second dose. So this is different than what's in the clinical trial report that AstraZeneca filed with New England Journal of Medicine, who the chief editor, by the way, is Eric Rubin, who's the guy that is famous for telling the FDA, we don't know what these vaccines are going to do to kids until we start giving them to them. So under his supervision, this report goes out and it says that all adverse events are followed for up to 730 days. They stopped tracking my data at day 60. And they also say that the people that didn't get the second dose or follow the full dose series were dropouts. They just chose to forego getting the second dose, which I know for a fact is not the case in my circumstance, but also I have personally met several other people that have been injured in the AstraZeneca clinical trial who have the exact same experience as I do, that they reported a serious adverse event. The clinical trial company, so AstraZeneca, poof, gone as fast as they could, and the information wasn't tracked. There's several of them that actually were harassed because they were trying to push that they were injured and there were problems, and they the drug company actually went back and stalked these people on social media.
I'm being a good preschooler. You have to point at me and say shame.
Yes.
Just to stop there, because it's fascinating.
Yeah.
But you said when it first happened, you said, hey, I'm having a problem. Mm-hmm. And they said, we might have to put it on hold again being the operative word. Did that happen?
No.
So nothing?
No. Actually, what happened was the opposite. After I reported my injury, and now knowing several other people had reported injuries that were very similar. The drug company saw what was going on in the media in the United States with Pfizer and Moderna racing to get people to take their products, right?
And we all saw that.
They had been approved, and AstraZeneca starts putting out press release after press release after press release saying, hold on, just wait. AstraZeneca's product is amazing. Wait, don't go get Pfizer. Wait for AstraZeneca. Mm-hmm. There was nothing about any serious neurological complications, strokes, all of these other things that we know happen with AstraZeneca now. Mm-hmm. So my husband was the one that called BS on that. And he reported that to the federal government, to the National Institutes of Health in January of 2021.
Just to be clear, so AstraZeneca is not approved yet?
They're pulled completely out of the running in the United States.
Okay.
So this is why AstraZeneca is not available to the public in the U.S.
Okay.
So we reported my injury, and at that point I had connected with someone else, the exact same injury. We both talked to the NIH, reported exactly the same thing happened to both of us.
Because AstraZeneca is patently not doing that.
Correct. Yes. Yeah, because it's safe. There's nothing to see here. It's fine. Just hang on. We're just working on the paperwork with the FDA. As soon as that's approved, go get your shot, everybody. So the NIH responded within 24 hours. Mm-hmm. And there's two things that happened. 10 days later, they pulled AstraZeneca out of the running in the United States. But the second thing that started was a study at the National Institutes of Health to investigate neurological complications after COVID vaccines in general.
Wow. And what did they find?
Well, the study went on for a long time, and they haven't really told anybody, but they threw the study out on a preprint server.
Okay,
so
explain what that means.
There's a whole lot of stuff that went on there. They flew us out. So I was one of those that went. My husband went with me, right? I was there for 8 days.
Doing what?
We ended up getting full-on evaluation from everything from, MRIs, from special MRI machine.
From the government?
From the government, yeah. So this is all taxpayer funded, right? These are the same people that hold the patents for the Moderna vaccine, by the way. Mm-hmm. When I flew there, it was in a wheelchair. My husband lifted me, and put me on the plane. I laid on 3 seats in the airplane. Same thing. Get off, and there were bomb-sniffing dogs that went around the car, the escort, to get us into the facility. So this isn't like you can just casually walk into this facility,
right? A lot
of
security.
A lot of security. X-ray machines, and, they went through our bags and everything. So when you get in there, it's, you're in there for a reason. So they did all of the top-of-the-line testing. I've never had so much blood drawn in my life. My husband's a chemist, so he thought it was super fascinating, everything that we learned there. And it was strange because when we were there, they were talking about the vaccines and all of the problems that they were seeing. And this was things that the media and the public was not being informed about at all, right? So neurological complications were the primary issues that they were seeing. They also were seeing that long COVID was not, prevented from after you get a vaccine. They also were showing that the vaccines actually made a lot of people with long COVID worse, not better. So the people there knew exactly what was going on more than we did.
That the vaccines were problematic.
The vaccines were problematic. Now, what's interesting about this is this study, it's not just some random study, okay? It was directly under Fauci. Mm-hmm. So, you've got Francis Collins at the top, Fauci, and this team directly reported him. The reason we know that is because Fauci personally met with 2 vaccine injured who were in the study at the NIH. Mm-hmm. So they knew exactly what was going on. And then at the same time, Fauci's out there all over the media, and you saw everything I saw.
Yeah.
The scientific achievements of interventions in the form of vaccines and therapeutics that can mitigate some of the suffering and the morbidity, that's when we'll really get our arms around this.
Yeah, so I mean, it's just, these are safe, and everybody was getting gaslit that if you question it, you're crazy, right? Or you're hateful, you know, you don't care about society, you want to kill grandma, right?
You're an anti-vaxxer.
Yeah, and it was the most like hateful, like emotionally fueled campaign I've ever seen.
Look, I want to ask you so much, but just while we're on this, what did you think of Fauci's testimony before Congress?
You believed an institutional should make it hard for people to live their lives so they'd feel pressured to get vaccinated. Could we run the audio clip on that, please?
Once people feel empowered and protected legally, you were going to have schools, universities, and colleges are going to say, you want to come to this college, buddy? You're going to get vaccinated. Lady, you're going to get vaccinated. Yeah. Big corporations like Amazon and Facebook and all of those others are going to say, you want to work for us, you get vaccinated. When you make it difficult for people in their lives, they lose their ideological bullshit.
It was insane to me, especially after seeing all of the hate and the death threats that we have gotten. If you're in this world publicly at all talking about COVID, you're getting death threats from somewhere.
Yeah. Also, he was so unequivocal in the beginning, and I interviewed him, and it was, you have to get vaccinated. Everyone, you know, like you said, and if you were un-American or everything you could possibly imagine. No, but I talk about his testimony, and now he went to Congress. Like, well, there could be, you know, ramifications, and I mean, we knew about this, but we, you know, and he was so sort of wishy-washy, whereas in the beginning, it was so, you know, unequivocal. The science is settled. We wouldn't do it if it wasn't. And now, sadly, cases like yours, and I'm just going to have to look it up here because I wrote it down, how to say it exactly. You know, myocarditis.
Right.
Did I say that correctly?
A little mild myocarditis.
Yeah. So all of a sudden, these things are coming up. Heart attacks, etc. Strokes. And now when you approach people, it's like, well... and so I just wanted to stop and say, like, you know, because to go back to those original feverish moments, and you're in the middle of it, getting tested, going, hold on a minute, and this is being reported directly to the powers that be, including Fauci.
Correct, yes. Yeah. And Fauci and his team were the ones that diagnosed me with post-vaccine neuropathy.
Okay, what is that?
So post-vaccine neuropathy, unfortunately, it's a progressive disease, as I've learned over the last several years, you know, with more and more experts. It's essentially, you have an initial upset. It could be COVID. This has happened with people that do get a COVID infection. It also can happen from the HPV vaccine, H1N1 vaccine. This is not something that's new, which is why the NIH, as soon as we started reporting that, we, the injured, started reporting this type of injury, they knew exactly what it was because they had seen it before.
The symptoms.
The symptoms, yes. And they had
in other vaccines.
With other vaccines, yes. So this is new to the world to know that neurological conditions of this degree can happen. But the government has known for a long time.
And so is that documented with HPV vaccines, et cetera?
Yes. There are several people that have been trying to sue the drug companies directly for those types of injuries.
And so they pulled AstraZeneca off the shelves, which seemingly justifies your, hey, this has health ramifications that are devastating. Is that the reason they gave?
Well, you know, the company line is that, well, people just aren't using our product anymore. But then when you actually look at the press coverage in the UK specifically, because it's the Oxford product, right? So London specifically, the mainstream media in London was all about, you know, that this is the product that everybody needs. And then as soon as the side effects started, they started dialing that back. And it was very interesting because AstraZeneca, when you line it up with the other products, Moderna, Pfizer, and J&J, AstraZeneca has twice as much of a risk of harm as the other three.
So they were the Oxford-based one. They pulled them off the American shelves. Were there cases of the same issues in Europe and globally?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I know. internet makes the world small. Yeah. So I know a lot of just amazing people in the UK and elsewhere in the world that got picked off by AstraZeneca, just like me. Every single one of them is incredibly upset that they were not told about me or the other people that were suffering like me. And this is where it's interesting that the National Institutes of Health gathering all this information, they should have disclosed this as soon as they knew what was going on. But in the summer of 2021, right before OSHA mandates came out, they went silent. They stopped tracking all of our data at home. They stopped asking us for updates, and our follow-up appointments to the NIH to close out the study were canceled. We were ghosted. So at that point, we knew that there was something fishy. Yeah, because at that point they had been reassuring us that they would disclose this data to the public, right? We have all this in emails as well.
And sorry, do you have any idea of numbers that we're talking, of people?
I know that we sent at least 100 people their way. They only claim that there were 23 of us, which I know for a fact is untrue. And we actually know 23 people that were in the study, and we know more than 23 people that were in the study.
With similar...
Yes, yeah. And I'm the only one from AstraZeneca, by the way, that was in the study. Everyone else was Pfizer, Moderna.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
So we have all of these people that were in the same study.
With the same symptoms?
Same symptoms, yes. It was all, yes. So we all had this similar constellation of symptoms. They varied a little bit. By some people would say that their sensations were burning instead of tingling and sharp. Yeah. And some people would pass out more. Some other people would have,
but all very serious.
Yes, and a similar constellation of symptoms, but to varying degrees.
Okay, now this is how interesting you are. I literally haven't even got to any of my questions.
Sorry.
No, this is great. So, do they have any explanation? Like, there's a genetic predisposition to something, or did they give you any explanation? Did anybody tell you?
They told me not to vaccinate my kids because they were concerned about a genetic component. With the surveys that we've done at React 19, which is the advocacy organization we run now, we found that 25% of our membership have one other person in their family that had a similar reaction to the COVID vaccine.
Of people.
Yeah, so that's a very valid concern, something that the general public was not informed of. We also have a solid chunk of people, about 35%, 37%, of people that had a reaction to the first dose, and their healthcare professionals coerced them to getting the second, which then put them into a severe condition.
Yeah, I had a friend who had a heart attack, and he went into the hospital, very good hospital. I'm not going to say, but when I heard he had a heart attack, I said, COVID, and he said yes. I mean, and he asked the doctor, and he said that this is all anecdotal.
Right.
But that the numbers were off the charts. And I was like, because he was on a plane, and if he had not landed, he'd be dead. And these numbers were off the charts. And I'm like, why isn't anybody saying anything about that? Now they are. And now things are coming. And well, this must make you furious, because now that sort of we're limping towards honesty, and only limping towards honesty because people like yourself are forcing us to look at honestly and factually what actually happened. Anyway, I want to get to some of these questions. Speaking of facts, what is the PrEP Act?
The PrEP Act?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So probably need to step one step before that.
Yeah.
So in 1986, there were just a handful of vaccines on the market at that time.
Right.
And all of the pharmaceutical companies got together and said, look, we know that these vaccines cause harm. It's inevitable. Every pharmaceutical product causes harm. Water in too much can cause harm.
Sure.
Right?
There's a reaction to anything that you put in your body.
Correct, yes.
Yeah.
So they said, we're not going to make these products for you anymore unless we're protected.
Right.
So they went to every single country in the world, developed country in the world, and said, we're done making these products until you guys give us some protection.
Yeah.
And they got it. So that started a new market for vaccines. Instead of just a small market where 6 or 7 were on the schedule in the U.S., it's exploded into a massive multi-billion-dollar industry. That same protection from liability is still in place now. So there's a special program that you apply to, and you get a lawyer if you have a child, because these are mostly children that are getting these vaccines, right? If you have a child that gets injured, you go and you get a lawyer and you go into this special little program. You sit there for 7 years and maybe get a payout. It's 50-50 chance, okay? PrEP Act, 2005. This is a result of 9/11. The federal government decides that they're going to put together a preparedness, readiness, emergency package. And in there, they gave the drug companies protection in addition to the already 1986 protections. They gave federal officials protections. They gave federal agencies that are operating within their own sphere full immunity all the way through willful misconduct.
So they use 9/11 as a sort of catch-all to say, okay, we're going to make sure that we can do what we want to do as a government, and nobody can sue us or hold us or accountable. And they use 9/11, which, by the way, 9/11 was a catch-all for a lot of other things as well. Yeah. Sorry, keep going.
People don't know about this convenient little law.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know about it until researching it now. It's interesting.
But this is why you're not seeing lawsuits. This is why you're not seeing...
Because you can't.
Yeah, this is why you're not seeing any charges against Fauci. This is why you're not seeing any charges against, our little buddies at the FDA, which we haven't even talked about.
Yeah, we're getting into it. Look, I haven't even got to my questions.
Yeah, I know. Or even the clinical trial, or even any vaccine injured in the United States. And the reason being is because the PrEP Act provides so much protection.
Blanket protection.
Blanket protection. Yeah. Now, what's crazy is, okay, 9/11 is a whole thing.
Yeah.
COVID was a whole other thing, right?
Yeah.
And so there will be people that be like, yeah, but we were all doing the best we could, and we wanted to make sure that we could get drugs into people to protect them. And then, of course, the remdesivir debacle happened, right? None of those families can sue either. But now they're moving on to monkeypox. So monkeypox has been afforded this same EUA protection. So they also are protected under the PrEP Act. So if anyone's harmed by a monkeypox vaccine, they're SOL as well. So if you are harmed by a COVID vaccine, you are on your own. There is no one coming to help you. There is no program that's set up to support you. And you're going to be lucky if you can find some other people that are injured on the internet that happen to have the secrets of the NIH.
Yeah, and the majority of people, in America at least, were vaccinated. So if you do have any trouble, you have no recompense. You have no way of going after the people who did this to you.
And there's no research going into addressing the harms.
Right.
None. There's little studies popping up here and there.
So if this PrEP Act is offering blanket protection, how are you suing them?
Well, what's interesting is my AstraZeneca's defense in my case is the PrEP Act.
Yeah.
So this is going to be the first unprecedented case.
It's the challenge of the PrEP Act.
Yes, we are challenging the PrEP Act. So right now there are over 100 cases that have challenged the PrEP Act in different ways that have all failed. So our angle is contract law. So I'm not actually suing them because of an injury. I'm suing them because they didn't own up to their obligations in the contract.
Tortious interference of a contract.
Correct.
The basis of American law.
Correct. So this is going to be something that I think probably every American is going to want to know where the courts land on this, because this is going to tell everybody just how incredibly robust the PrEP Act is or is not, because it's been impenetrable up until this point. Incredibly
interesting.
Yeah.
We need tort reform in America, but that's very interesting. Tortious interference of a contract is probably your best bet, because it's literally the basis of capitalism. So how do you think it's going?
It's I'm not an expert in law, but this would be open and shut if it wasn't a vaccine case. So because the vaccines are held to a different standard in the United States, and there's so many different laws and different things that are, protecting this baby, which is the vaccination program. Anything that goes up against that, we don't know what's going to happen.
All right. Now let's get into it here. How many others like you are there, do you think, that were affected by this vaccine?
In general, I There's two studies in particular that I point to. One was done by Freeman and Doshi, and they analyzed all of the clinical trial data because you can't look at VAERS, there's all of these databases throughout the world, but they don't actually give you a rate of incidence.
Right.
So they actually looked at the cold hard data, the tables, the subnotes, everything, and they found that serious adverse events happen at a rate of 1 in 800. The second data point that points kind of in the same direction comes out of Germany. The government of Germany has actually acknowledged post-vaccine syndrome from the COVID vaccines. They say that it's a severe multi-system syndrome that happens after COVID vaccination. In a similar way, they're finding the same thing with COVID, and they call that long COVID. So they have that one at 2 in 5,000.
But hold on. So the symptoms for long COVID are similar, or if not the same, to the syndrome of after vax. What was it?
Post-vax syndrome. Yeah. So Science Magazine has reported, they call it long vax. We ran a piece in Science Magazine. So there's a few of these people that are throwing this out there, trying to say, look, here's the truth. And you know just as well as I do, if it's the truth that's convenient, one mainstream piece leads to 100 mainstream pieces, right? But when it comes to this, one mainstream piece gets out, there's a bunch of ratings for it, and then it sits in the corner collecting dust.
Yeah. We did a piece once on polio vaccines in Afghanistan, and they weren't letting the kids get polio vaccines, and they made up all this stuff that was a Zionist conspiracy and all these things, and it took off everywhere. It was a big thing everywhere. And I remember thinking at the time, that's the one tiny instance that they want you to say, that, they should get the vaccine. Polio, obviously, you don't want polio, et cetera. And I remember saying, well, wow, that's really got a lot of pickup. Whereas a lot of the sort of anti-stuff during COVID, which was, by the way, the biggest story in the world, didn't have nearly the same amount of pickup by media, for example. And that one of the reasons that spurred me on to do my show is because I'm like, well, what the hell's happening here?
Right.
Now, shouldn't they, and don't they, and I don't know, so I'm asking you all these questions, but shouldn't they be forced or to make this information public? How many people were affected? Or
you would think so, right? I mean, it's a big number when you're vaccinating everybody that's alive.
Yeah.
It's something that I would think would be providing people essential consumer consent. And that's the cornerstone of American medicine.
Sure.
So there's no other product that is administered to you where you don't have full disclosure, right? Like when you go in for a spinal tap, they'll tell you all the risks.
Yeah.
And you actually have to sign a document saying, yep, I'm aware of the risks. And, but for some reason they have censored the whole other side of that scope, which is when something goes wrong, that's when you really want to have the information and now, so you can act appropriately. So people are being given a certain amount of chapters in a book, and they're being forced to make decisions with only a few chapters of the book.
So there are no overall stats, global stats, U.S. stats on the negative.
No, but isn't that amazing that they have all of those stats to a T with COVID?
Yeah.
And long COVID.
Yeah.
And the impact on the economy.
Yeah.
And the burden on the medical system.
But they don't have it for negative effects. They don't release it.
Yeah. So what a coincidence.
Do they say they just don't have them? Is that the...
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. So Peter Marks, who's the head of biologics at the FDA, he just released a paper last week in the Mayo Medical Journal talking about this specifically, saying the VAERS system isn't reliable and it's not collecting the data that we need it to, especially when it comes to these more complicated COVID vaccine adverse events, which is what I have. And so they're dialing back, backtracking all of this to say there's a reason why we can't see anything. But
why? Because the systems are wrong?
I have my opinions. So my opinion is they have the data. And the reason why I know they have the data is because my husband, who's a scientist, has looked at the data that these drug companies have given and submitted in their reports to get licenses to the FDA, as well as the European Medical EMA, which is basically the FDA of Europe, the data is there. The harms are there. 66% of the adverse events that were reported to Pfizer in that 2.5-month period after the initial rollout of the vaccine, 66% is neurological. Cardiovascular is secondary. The majority of the cardiovascular events that were reported to Pfizer were classified as serious, not mild, which is what the FDA repeatedly told people, at least for 1.5 years, mild myocarditis. But myocarditis that kills a 16-year-old boy
it's not mild.
That's not mild.
So let's get into that. You mentioned we haven't gotten into the FDA. So, okay, FDA. Go.
So while we were at the NIH, we also were connected with the FDA through a couple of key senators that we started working with at this point.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. And so they were forced to work with us. So we started...
Forced by
these senators, right? So
that's good.
They were like, hey, what are you guys doing? You can't just blow off these people. They took your product and they're harmed.
Okay.
Right?
Was it a Utah senator?
Utah senator.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And then, of course, Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And that was strange for me because at this time I was a lifelong Democrat. And then the only people that were sticking up for me and my injured colleagues were Republicans. And so...
Why? Just because it became politicized?
It became politicized. Yeah. And I'm sure you've seen that now in the hearings. It's like it's two different faces.
Yeah.
The Democrat side is preaching a different language.
Well, that was my problem with it from the beginning, is that you have an issue which affects everyone. And it became so politicized that you don't know what to believe.
And isn't it crazy? Because it's a medical condition.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's like, okay, you get hit by a car.
Yeah.
You say, hey, I got hit by a car.
Yeah.
If I say I got injured by a vaccine, there's 4 or 5 people, well, I had a vaccine and it went fine.
Yeah.
And if someone was hit by a car and you're like, well, I drive my car every day. I've never hit anybody. It's fine.
Yeah, what's wrong with you?
Exactly.
Because I got it and I'm fine and you got it. And, so that's for sure one thing. The other thing is, I don't want to get off the FDA and the senator. That's very interesting. Let's actually finish with that before. Yeah,
so the FDA, we started having these regular meetings with Peter Marks at the FDA.
Yeah, okay.
So we have the FDA and the NIH both fully aware of what's going on at the NIH. The NIH is confirming all of these COVID vaccine injuries. Not once did they tell anyone that we sent them to that they did not have a COVID vaccine reaction, that it was something else. At the same time, these exact same officials are going on the news saying, we don't know if that's actually an injury. It could be, that they fell down the stairs at their aunt's house and had something gross to drink or something, right? Like they made all excuses possible publicly other than COVID vaccine injuries. But to us directly, they're confirming that we have COVID vaccine injuries. Peter Marks, literally, there is nobody that's saying that injuries don't occur. Over and over and over and over in these meetings with us. Over and over and over. So he was making us feel crazy. And we're like, we're seeing what you're telling the world. And there is not a single word or phrase that even hints that there is a possible cause for harm, that people are going to have damage. None of us can choose whether or not you're going to have a problem with a pharmaceutical product.
And even if there is a sort of genetic predisposition, your vaccine has supercharged that. It has caused that.
Right. Well, and there's a study that just was released last 2 weeks ago that talks about that. Talks about there's people with 2 doses specifically of the mRNA. They have an initial upset. That's
Moderna.
Pfizer and Moderna.
Yeah.
So they'll have an initial, possible catastrophic cardiovascular event, heart attack, strokes, MI, which is basically your heart just stops beating. Or now it's looking like there's years that pass and there's this other window of catastrophic event that can happen.
You're freaking me out now.
I know, sorry. But this is the information that should be on the news.
Yes. Okay, this is what I'm getting to. Now. Okay, so they're not giving us the information that patently is there. Now, why? And the only reason I can think of, and I want your thoughts on this, is, okay, COVID, my problem with COVID is when it first came out, it was, so Contagion being the movie where everybody died. I was watching Contagion when COVID came out, so that's why I was like, Contagion, the movie, and people are like, I don't know what you're talking about, Shane. But anyway, Contagion is like COVID, but more serious, you know? Or World War Z or one of these things. Okay, so we have it in our collective mindset that this could happen. Because of that, we're willing to get vaccinated, we're willing to do all this stuff, we're willing to shelter in place, we're willing to change our families of young kids not going to school, all these terrible things. Because we're like, well, we don't want to die as a species,
right.
So we're going to do what's right.
Right.
Do you think the government, the EMA or whoever, that they're doing this because they're worried that the next thing, the next virus, that if they say, well, the vaccine was problematic, we kept information back from people, we hurt people, we hurt our own citizens, and then lied about that, and then hid it. Because if we say that, then no one's going to take the next vaccine.
Yeah.
And if they don't take the next vaccine, that could be Ebola. So it's kind of the boy cried wolf, you know, and they did.
They did.
Yeah.
And that's why vaccine hesitancy is at a historic high.
Yeah.
Right?
Explain vaccine hesitancy.
So vaccine hesitancy, it's actually a diagnosis code now.
Right, okay, interesting.
There is not a diagnosis code for COVID vaccine adverse event, by the way, but they were very quick to add, during the pandemic, vaccine hesitancy as a diagnosis code. So
what does it mean?
It means that you have a question about a vaccine. That's as simple as it is. So this is how draconian this social structure is for us now, right? We can't even ask a question about a pharmaceutical product. We have to accept the information that they give us, whether it's propaganda or not, and we have to say, okay, yep, I'm going to roll up my sleeve and do my part for society. Right. Anything that does not fit within that bound can be classified as vaccine hesitancy. Anti-vax and anti-vaxxer, I don't know if you knew this, Webster's Dictionary also changed the terminology for anti-vaxxer during the pandemic. So to reflect this, anyone that's questioning it.
So what do they?
Anyone that's questioning it, anyone that if you have any hesitation at all, which seems
normal.
Yeah, like every single medical procedure I've ever gone through, which isn't a lot, but well, now it is. I want to know, you know, exactly what could happen, what's the benefits, you know, so I can make a fully informed decision, so I myself can be aware of the risks if things go bad, right? And this is so un-American to me, right? Everything that I believed that the American Constitution affords, asking a question here and there should not be labeled as ignorant.
It's one of the reasons why we wanted to talk to you, because look, you're before you sort of dyed in the wool Democrat. Your husband's a chemist. You're pro, you know, I'm going to do my part, you know, vaccination. And then this terrible thing happens, and then all of a sudden, you know, you're sort of tarred with the sort of anti-vaxxer brush, and you brought it up to me like, oh, you're going to get death threats and this and that and everything else. And they're like, well, we're asking questions.
Right.
That's America. Right. That's what we're designed to do. That's why we live here.
Yep.
And it seems to me, and this is why I find this subject so fascinating, is because it's so politicized, which I think is sadly an exemplification of not just this issue, but a lot of hot button issues.
Yes.
And it's like you either believe it, and you better believe it and just shut up about it, or you don't believe it, where you're, or not even you don't believe it, sorry, you have questions about it and say, hold on a second, what about the increase in heart attacks? My friend had a heart attack. Hey, hold on a second, this happened to me and it's a bad thing. I don't want, and to quote you, I don't want this to happen to anybody else, even my worst enemy, because it's so bad. Okay, so you have these terrible things happening. You put up your hand and you're saying, hold on a second. Can we just have the information? Hold on a second. Can we talk to somebody, please? I volunteered as a human being for this thing, and now I'm being painted with this, that I'm some sort of, you know, lunatic fringe.
Yeah, public enemy #1.
Exactly, and you're literally the poster child of sanity, and the only reason why you're doing it is because I got harmed by this thing, and I don't want anybody else to get harmed.
Right.
That seems to me crazy. Now I'm getting
no.
mid verklempt.
Well,
all right. What would accountability look like to you? So, there we go. Come on, get into it.
That would be lovely.
Yeah, well, what does it look like?
Every single person harmed should be able to have their day in court.
Yeah.
Period.
Normal.
Not even a question. Every person harmed should be able to cry out for help on social media, to their doctors, to their federal government without fear of any reprisal whatsoever.
But that's normal. That's not crazy.
That's not crazy, right?
No.
People don't realize that both of those essential rights are completely gone for people that are harmed by vaccines.
I've just noticed, and we just talked about vaccine hesitancy. I have to backtrack. I just noticed a note here. Bill Gates went to the White House.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, God, here we go. Bill Gates went to the White House because he did a study on vaccine hesitancy. And because of that, there was a lot of fallout and ramifications. I know some of them, but I want you to tell me because you would know better than I.
The ramifications. Well, Bill Gates funded a study and a project that went through Stanford. It's called the Virality Project.
Yeah.
Virality Project started right at the beginning of COVID, so before the vaccines rolled out, and they wanted to monitor everything that would impact the public perspective of COVID vaccines and getting your shot. And they were logging everything on social media, mainstream media, anything they could find. They were putting these reports together, briefings, and they would brief the White House. The White House would then take those and censor everybody on the reports through social media, mainstream media. So, Democrat, clinical trial participant. I was all in on this whole thing, right? I'm going to do my part.
You're not wearing tinfoil on your head.
No.
You're a mom in Utah,
right.
Preschool. Come on, poster child.
Right? So I'm their person. I am their soldier to fight the pandemic.
Yeah.
Something happens that I have no control over. My body has an extreme reaction.
Yeah.
And then I learn the hard way that the government isn't going to do their part, despite the fact that I'm on their side. Like, I'm still at this point in my head, I'm on your side, guys, right? And then I decide that I need to speak out.
Yeah.
I speak out and I visit with senators and do that part, which also is part of the playbook in the United States. You know, like we learn, if there's a problem, you go talk to your representatives. You speak to the media. You know,
the senators, they sound like they did the right thing.
They did, yeah. And then what I learned is that the Virality Project was tracking my every move.
What?
And so it showed up in a document. This is actually in another lawsuit. So it showed up in a document, my name and every single thing that I was doing. They knew the senators I was meeting with and when. They tracked every single news story that was covered during that time. And what's crazy is the first debut that I had publicly was speaking with Senator Ron Johnson at a press conference in Milwaukee. And this was in June of 2021. Within 24 hours of that press conference, my support group that I was an admin in got shut down.
How?
That Facebook just, boop, it was gone. Yeah. Then 5 days later, another support group that I was in was shut down. And we never could figure out why.
How can they shut down?
How can they do that? How is that constitutional?
Right.
Why is that even a possibility?
Yeah.
We literally were talking about our, tingling skin and our food that we can't eat, and people were screaming for help in there, like super desperate, scary situations for thousands of people. And they can't get answers anywhere. And they find each other.
What was the reason?
There still isn't a reason.
No reason.
There's no reason. The groups just got shut down, gone.
Wow.
And then we come to find out, oh, here's Brie's name, boop, 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 and they're tracking your every move. Oh, and by the way, that went to the White House. And now we know that the White House was heavily...
Sorry, how did you find this out?
It actually showed up on the internet. Someone Googled my name and they sent me the report. The reports were on the internet. They've taken them down now. So my First Amendment rights, and my First Amendment rights still are hit.
Yeah.
I'm still not able to say what I feel like I am entitled to say about my true and lived experience online.
Why?
So we have logged evidence of Google screening this. We have logged evidence of Facebook screening this, YouTube, every single one of these platforms that the mainstream uses to have a free and unbiased flow of information. And they access this every day. we're not allowed to talk the way that we want to talk. We're not allowed to share the truth.
So you believe that because the Stanford Project was following you, and then it went to the White House, that they could call up Facebook and say, take them off?
The timing is exact. The exact same time that our support groups were shut down, the exact same weeks my name showed up in those briefs. So I don't think that that's a coincidence. But our lawyers, because the first lawsuit I ever filed in my life was actually against the Biden administration for this reason.
For following you or for what?
Shutting us down.
Sorry, what's the
For the federal government censoring us.
Right.
And restricting our
But then you have to prove
rights,
that
the
they
First
told
Amendment.
Facebook to knock it out.
Correct.
Okay,
So
how do you
that's where
prove
we're
that?
at right now.
Subpoena them.
We subpoena them, we go through discovery, you know.
If you find out that the White House told Facebook to knock down that's going to be insane.
But you and I both know that with the headline whiplash, with all the corrupt things that the government has been, outed on in the last 3 years.
If that happens, you're going to come and I'm going to shout it to the highest mountaintops. Okay. That's
right.
Like if
the timing of that isn't just a little, I mean, it's like, how does it get more tight than that? And then you've got Zuck over here now saying, sorry guys, the White House told me to shut everybody down, so I was just doing as I was told.
Listen, if you can prove collusion between the White House and Facebook on your
my case
victims, no, but on you of a group of victims talking about what to eat, that is, I mean, I'll get everyone I know in the news business to make that on the front page. Okay. That's a big one.
It is. That's why we're suing them.
Yeah.
There's enough evidence there that it's like, what are you doing to your people?
Well, that's what I want to keep going back to, because look, I can see the tweets now, because look, when you start talking about any of this stuff, everybody's like, well, you're just going down a rabbit hole, and I want to keep going back. Like, you are like literally the poster child of sort of a normal, law-abiding mom, and because you had a very bad personal experience, you're like, look, I'm just doing what's sane and rational. And then that you, as a person, as an entity, have become politicized.
Right.
Like around you. Like what's happening to the point where the White House potentially colluded with Facebook. I mean, you've got to feel like, what the hell happened?
Oh,
I'm in the eye of a storm.
It's changed all of my beliefs.
Yeah.
I've had to question the entire foundation of society. I actually wanted the opposite of this, right? You
wanted the vaccine to work, to help people so that nobody dies.
And be able to, live my life, and now I'm disabled and drowning in medical debt, and I'm just one of tens of thousands that I know of firsthand in the United States.
Yeah, I want to just say, I heard before you came in here, you were very active and, a rock climber and things. And you came in with a cane, and like people will say, well, she doesn't look bad. And, and
it's an invisible illness.
Yeah, so maybe you could go on about some of the sort of lasting effects of what it did to you.
Oh, yeah. So now I have a diagnosis called CIDP, chronic inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy. In the simplest terms, it's like MS, but MS is, your central nervous system decaying, working out. CIDP is your peripheral nervous system decaying, going in. And so what's happening is my nervous system is being attacked constantly by my immune system.
Yeah.
So I am fighting as hard as I can now and using the quality of life that I have now to try to further, the cause for people like me before it gets worse, right? And to try to find answers to maybe stop that decline.
Sure.
Reverse it would be amazing, right? I mean, but when it comes to anything that messes with your nerves, it's a serious problem that is probably one of the most poorly understood type of syndromes. Incredibly painful. So I experience pain 24/7. The only time that I can feel a little bit less pain is when I take a bunch of meds at night so I can nod off to go to sleep. So so people that are dealing with this syndrome, I can't express enough to people how much of a nightmare it is. It's something I would have never imagined.
I just want to say, you know, we get millions of people who watch this. I want to say, should they go to react19.org?
Yeah, so that's our
symptoms.
Yep, react19.org is our nonprofit that we run. We currently have 36,000 injured Americans. We partner with over 20 other countries who have similar organizations like this, and we literally are the ground zero for this situation. We know more than people's providers.
Sure.
We have an underground network of providers to help people. So if you need a doctor that's just not going to gaslight you, give us a call. We also have a medical grant program where we've issued $880,000 to people for medical expenses after COVID vaccine injuries. The U.S. federal government has paid a little over $400,000 total to date, so we're even outpacing
Sorry, for all vaccines?
For COVID vaccines. The numbers speak for themselves, right? The federal
and sorry,
government
where do you
does not
get
have
your
this as a
800?
priority.
Right.
It's just grassroots people. So our average donation is $80. And so people go on our website and they'll donate. It's tax deductible, right? And they can opt to donate directly to this fund, and 100% of the donations that go into the fund go into the hands of people for medical expenses.
Right. Well, we should all donate. And listen, what have some of the negative reactions that you've seen personally? You have this terrible event happen. You're frustrated, you're confused. What are some of the sort of backlash or things that you didn't ever perceive happening in your life? You've been sort of thrust into this unwanted role.
So as far as the actual injuries, you know, neurological is primary. People have a lot of ocular issues. People will end up with skin problems, so they'll be out in the sun for a little bit too long and all of a sudden their skin will be way more irritated than it ever was. GI issues are pretty simple now for people to identify. You know, you could eat a carrot yesterday, you get your shot, a week later all of a sudden you can't eat carrots anymore. That's because your immune system is turned on and is starting to hit different things that it shouldn't be.
It's gone haywire.
Yeah. Clotting is a big one across all the brands. Strokes, heart attacks, those are all very obvious. And this isn't to say, I just want to make this clear, this isn't to say that everybody's going to have a problem with the shots, right? But it's important for people to be aware, so then if they are feeling a little bit of weakness or if they're feeling faint, that maybe they go into their doctor proactively and go, okay, I need you to check my heart, I need to check my cholesterol, right? But if you are having some problems, there are people that can help, but it's just a matter of finding
the right people.
people.
Do doctors even know what to look for?
In general, no. No, they don't. It's the AMA is so, American Medical Association, which provides the diagnosis codes and the guidance to the medical community. They're so heavily funded by pharma that unless pharma says, okay, yeah, here's some problems.
Yeah.
AMA isn't gonna be telling people.
I want to bring up a nuance. I'm very anti-censorship, but like on this vax issue, there's a lot of misinformation, disinformation out there of, like, for example, you're, very personally affected by this. It's taken over your whole life. How does it make you feel when you see something on where they're like, they injected us with nanobots and, all of this stuff? It sort of does a disservice, no?
It does. And that's been really frustrating for us because we're really trying to give a message for the masses, right? I mean, there's the people that see it and they recognize it and they're looking for the harms and they're trying to address the harms, which is amazing. And we appreciate people spending their own time and money to help us find all of the possibilities that these products could be doing, because to inadvertently harm people because the drug companies themselves are not disclosing that information, right? But there's certain things that scientifically, husband's a scientist, that we look at and we go, if this is reality, if this is the truth, we're several years out from fully understanding that, right? And for right now, I have in my support groups thousands of people that are vulnerable and afraid, right? Because their bodies are in pain and being electrocuted 24/7. and then you've got someone coming out saying, hey, I'm educated, I'm a scientist, I'm this, this, this. You've got shit in your body that's going to kill you, and it's robots that are going to come together and annihilate you from the inside. Or so people that are terrified and they can't, there's nothing in their body or in their mind at this point that's helping them see reality for something that may not be reality. It's dangerous for them. We've had several people who have gotten this type of information in the past that we get suicide notes from them. Some of them come back, some of them are gone, right? It's so it's probably not the answer you wanted, but for us, it's a very
I just do this so I don't forget my question.
Dangerous. Okay, it's a very real, dangerous endpoint for the people that we're trying to keep alive. So people need to be very, very careful about what they're talking about, because if it is like, hey, you're gonna die, you know, then there's a bunch of people that I know, fine, I'm just gonna go do it.
I wanted to sort of end on a big macro note, because this is what I was writing is, we seem to be in a lull, a post-COVID lull. Like, okay, you know, we're not hoarding water and, you know, toilet paper. Like, okay, we have a lull, and in that lull, if it was a sane world, we would be saying, okay, let's look at the information of the last pandemic. Let's look at, you know, the bad things that happen. Let's look at these untold ramifications. Let's look at, you know, all of this stuff and put it together so we're better prepared, more educated. So if it does happen, God forbid, the next time, we've actually honestly looked at things. And it seems like we're not doing that. It seems like we're doing the opposite. We're censoring people. We're screwing with their First Amendment. We're trying to say they're crazy, or it didn't happen, or it's this, or it's a genetic predisposition, or what have you, because we're so afraid of the next pandemic where people won't accept, you know, what should happen or what theory, because now we don't believe it anymore.
Right.
You know, because of this disinformation, because they're not telling us, because they're not releasing the information, now we're more skeptical, and you have a growing number of people who don't believe it anymore. And that's, I was just writing this down because it's the first time I'm sort of formulating this thought of, if we gave out the information to people, that at least say, okay, well, we're all in it together and we're all being honest with each other. But if you hold back the information, or you spread disinformation, or you censor people, then they're not going to believe you. So the exact opposite is happening if anyone's listening from the government, which they are to you, therefore me. We should say, hey, look, let the information go free. Otherwise, people just are going to assume, because I'm like coming out of the pond going, wait a minute. And I was the same as you. I'm like, let's talk to people about the vaccine when it first happened. And now you sort of come out of the pond and you're going, wait a minute, what?
Yeah.
You know, you're doing this? And look, kudos for being so courageous, and sorry that something so bad had to happen to you to bring that out. I just wanted to say again, react19.org. Thank you for spending time with us today, Brienne. I don't know. I'm literally blown away by your story.
Thanks. I appreciate you listening.
Well, go to her website, and let's see if we can't. By the way, let's keep in touch, because I want to see what happens with that White House Facebook correlation. And hopefully, let's keep in touch on the deliberations between the lawsuit with AstraZeneca as well.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Love that.